Rabies virus disease presentation by Philip Ray, Cade Farmer, and Chase Telford.
Well, thanks to a man named Louis Pasteur, a vaccine was created. Louis Pasteur is no stranger to the medical world and has done much for the expansion of our understanding of microbiology. He is a chemist that, after further study, came to develop the first vaccine for rabies. It was first tested on animals and proved to be successful. However, at that point in time, it was unknown if it would be effective in humans. Well, the opportunity presented itself when a young boy by the name of Joseph Miser was mauled by a rabid dog. Yeesh. The boy was brought to Pasteur, and taking a leap of faith, Pasteur used the vaccine, hoping for a positive outcome. The vaccine proved to be a blessing to the young boy, and Pasteur later became a hero to the world as the vaccine used worked and led to further advancements in the medical world. So that's a little bit about the history of rabies. All right, etiology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the etiology of rabies for a bit. As I'm sure you are aware, rabies is a virus. The rabies virus is from the genus Lyssavirus, and the species is rabies. It is a single-stranded RNA virus, which has an envelope. The virus is approximately 180 nanometers long and 75 nanometers wide, so pretty small. The envelope to this virus is covered with many projections called spike proteins. Now, they're not really visible on the picture there, but they're really small projections that come out on the envelope. These are used for attaching to the host cells and begins the process of entering the cell for replication. Like all viruses, rabies is an obligate intracellular parasite, which means that it needs a host to reproduce. The virus lacks the resources to reproduce by itself and needs the assets a host offers to do the job. Rabies is zoonotic, which simply means that it is passed from animals to humans. How this goes about will be explained later in the presentation. The shape of the rabies virus is helical and is identified under a microscope by its unique bullet shape. As you can see in the picture there to the right, the rabies virus is relatively flat on one side and tapers to a soft point at the other, resembling the shape of a bullet. That's a little bit of the etiology there for you. Let's head over to the next slide here. So we have the reservoir here. So the reservoir for rabies is carried in a variety of wild mammals. These include canines, like foxes, skunks, raccoons, badgers, cats, and bats. According to our textbook, the main carrier of rabies is different depending on where you live, which is kind of cool, pretty unique. For some examples here, the raccoons are the predominant carrier of rabies in the East Coast of the United States, coyotes in Texas, and mainly skunks in California. So it's kind of cool, there's a variety there, depending on where you live. I spent some time seeking a reason why certain animals are more likely to carry the virus in certain areas, but I didn't find much. It's not really fully understood why at this time that only certain animals carry rabies, certain parts of the United States, of the world, really. But for those of you who are up in Rexburg, I looked up the main carrier for rabies, just for kicks and giggles for Idaho, and found it to be bats. So bats are the major rabies carriers in Idaho. So just thought you guys would want to know that. It's pretty cool.
So rabies is interesting because it can only be transmitted in one way, and that's through an infected organism's saliva to the receiving organism's nervous system. Generally, the infected organism bites the other and it becomes infected. Most commonly, it's transmitted through a fox or a raccoon or skunks. There's not been a reported case actually in the United States from a dog bite in several years, and that's mostly due to dogs being vaccinated, which has prevented the spread through dogs. There have been reported cases, though, of the virus being contracted without a person being bitten, one of which we'll speak of later, but most of the other ones, it's believed that while people were in bat caves, somehow the saliva fell from the bat into the mouth of some of the people in the caves, which is really gross. So once the virus is transmitted to the muscle, generally through a bite, it moves to the nervous system until it reaches the brain. The incubation period can last up to 7 years, but it generally lasts for about 3 to 12 weeks. And once the incubation period is over, the brain starts to swell and the virus moves to the salivary glands. But sometimes the symptoms don't show up for up to 5 days, but you're still contagious. So once the virus moves to the salivary glands, you can now infect others. And while the virus is in the incubation period, like I said, you're not contagious, so you're not able to spread the disease. And it's important that if you're ever bitten by an animal and you suspect that it may be infected, you do a few things. If you can capture the animal, you can watch it and see if it shows signs or symptoms of being infected. And if the animal dies, you can test its brain tissue for swelling, and that will tell you if it had rabies or not. If you do suspect that you have been infected, your doctor can test your saliva and salivary glands and your spinal fluid. Either one of those will allow the doctor to correctly diagnose you. And these same tests can be used to tell if a human is infected. Can also be used to tell if a dog or any type of animal is also infected. So the symptoms of rabies are pretty interesting and pretty hard to miss. They consist of things that are similar, whether it be in animals or humans, and it's considered a fatal encephalitis, but the symptoms are so unique in rabies that the book actually gives its own section apart from other encephalitises. So that's pretty interesting, and because it's transmitted through the saliva and generally with a bite, the time it takes for the signs and symptoms to appear greatly varies. So if the place of infection is closer to the head or neck, generally the signs and symptoms will begin to express themselves more rapidly. The time it takes an individual to start showing completely depends on the time it takes to reach the brain. Generally, symptoms begin with fever, vomiting, nausea, headache, fatigue, and kind of other non-specific symptoms that you may not expect. As time goes on, the signs and symptoms become worse and may include, but are not limited to, drooling, convulsions, exaggerated sensation at the bite, excitability, loss of feeling in the area under the body, loss of muscle function, muscle spasms, numbness and tingling, pain at the site of the bite, and difficulty swallowing. Any number of these symptoms is probably a good indicator that the individual is infected with rabies. Though if you've not been bitten by any type of mammal recently, the chances of you having rabies are very, very slim. So there have not been many people who have actually survived rabies after being infected and not receiving the vaccination. If you don't receive the vaccination immediately after you're bitten, most likely you will die. Whether you're an animal or a human being. But there is a girl named Precious Reynolds, that you can see here in this picture. She's an 8-year-old from California and is one of the few U.S. citizens that have actually survived rabies without the vaccine. So she contracted rabies from a feral cat while playing at recess one day at school. She was scratched and they didn't think much of it, so she never received the vaccine. So she was just scratched by a cat. And the family is not sure exactly when this happened, but soon after she started to feel sick to her stomach. She was really sick, and immediately after that she had paralysis. So she was paralyzed. She had pain in her neck and back, couldn't swallow, wasn't able to stand up, and she was eventually flown to the hospital where she developed encephalitis. And so what the doctors did is they decided to treat her with what's called the Milwaukee Protocol. This actually had worked on another teenager from the Milwaukee area a few years ago. And they gave her an antiviral medication and put her in an induced coma to allow for her brain to rest. And the treatment actually worked, and she was able to leave the intensive care unit. And the way she contracted the disease, though, is extremely rare, as is her survival. And she's lucky to be alive today, making a full recovery. They believe that there's only been 8 to 10 people in the whole world who have been known to have survived rabies without the vaccination, so it's truly a miracle she's alive.
Treatment for rabies virus in the U.S. typically includes 3 things: wound cleansing, passive antibody treatments, and rabies virus vaccinations. The virus is 100% preventable if treated with appropriate medical care. Wound cleansing is especially important because it reduces infection and has been shown to significantly reduce the risk of rabies alone without any further treatment. If someone has been exposed to rabies virus, it's important to not panic, but you should get medical care as soon as possible. The two most common vaccines used today include human diploid cell vaccine, which is shown on the table with a star, and purified chick embryo cell vaccine. Both of these vaccine types are inactivated or killed because scientists produce them from dead organisms by killing the disease-causing microbe with chemicals, heat, or radiation. This makes the vaccine safer and easier to transport, but also weakens its effectiveness. So treatments usually involve more than one round of vaccinations. So the take-home message from this slide is that the HDCV vaccine is the most common in the US, and the vaccine type is inactivated or killed. And I will explain how treatment can vary depending on whether someone exposed to rabies virus has previously been immunized or not in more detail on the next two slides. Individuals who have been exposed to rabies virus and haven't been immunized are given human immune rabies globulin, which contains the passive antibodies to provide immediate systemic protection when they arrive for medical care. And then a patient's treatment is followed by 4 rounds of vaccinations of either HDCV or PCECV on days 0, 3, 7, and 14. And so the multiple rounds of vaccinations comes back to the need for the body to get enough antibodies in it to fight the virus. Those who have already been immunized shouldn't receive the antibody human rabies immune globulin. They instead receive 2 rounds of either HDCV or PCECV on day 0 and day 3. And so the biggest and most important thing someone bitten or exposed to rabies virus can do is thoroughly wash the wound site and see your doctor as soon as you can. In the US, prevention and control has been very successful over the last 100 years. According to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, the number of rabies-related deaths in the US has declined from more than 100 annually at the turn of the century to 1 or 2 per year today. Prevention and control is a key part to preventing an outbreak. The source of rabies can be eliminated through animal control, education, and providing access to quality medical care. The CDC helps collect information to ensure public safety and prevent the spread of rabies throughout the US and the world. They play a key role in educating and providing the public with up-to-date information on cases and the do's and don'ts of rabies virus. This is very costly, but rabies-related deaths have been dramatically reduced in the last few years because of these methods. There are several things the public can do to help prevent and control the rabies virus, which can include that people should become immunized if they are around animals often. They should leave wild animals alone. Don't let your kids feed or try to pet them. Vaccinate your pets and take them to see a vet regularly. Maintain control of your pets by not letting them roam the neighborhoods, and keep them spayed or neutered to avoid stray animals in the neighborhoods. And probably most important, report stray animals to animal control and report any rabid animals to animal control. In conclusion, it's important to remember that rabies in humans is 100% preventable through prompt, appropriate medical care. Yet, more than 55,000 people, mostly in Africa and Asia, die from rabies every year, a rate 1 person every 10 minutes. The only well-documented cases of rabies caused by human-to-human transmission occurred among 8 recipients of transplanted corneas and among 3 recipients of solid organs. Rabies virus becomes non-infectious when it dries out and when it is exposed to sunlight. Different environmental conditions affect the rate at which the virus becomes inactive, but in general, if the material containing the virus is dry, the virus can be considered non-infectious. So that is the rabies virus.